About 50 years ago, an astronaut returning from the moon experienced things that he couldn't find a scientific explanation for. So, with some colleagues, he launched a new science focused on the mind and how it works in the body and across space and time. It's the field of Noetics, where the tools of modern science are used to help us understand how what we think and feel affects us and the world around us. Now, this is Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments from the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon.
Yes, this is Noetic Moments, where we explore the field of research that discovers what consciousness is, what it does, how it works, and how our lives could be very different if we understood it better. And I am Ruth Miller, a longtime student of consciousness, cybernetics, and anthropology, and through this series of programs, I'm introducing some of the people whose work has defined this field of research, and I'm explaining some of their ideas and experiments. I'll also explore some relevant news items and answer the questions that you send to my email address, ruth@noeticmoments.org. Noetic is Noetic. Well, in the nearly a year since we started this journey of exploring the research of scientists trying to understand what consciousness is and does, we first looked back at what was done in the early 20th century, and lately we've been looking at what's being done now. From Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, we learned that most of what goes on in the mind is not in our conscious awareness at all, but goes on in unconscious processes, that our minds can be thought of as having three different parts: what we're aware of, our personal awareness; what we aren't aware of, that's keeping our bodies going and also includes our fears and beliefs about potential threats and dangers, which we can call the individual subconscious; and what we aren't aware of that enlivens our spirits and guides us in our actions, which we can call the individual superconscious. We learned from Charles Tart and others that we can change our state of consciousness and shift which of those aspects of mind we are aware of, and also what we are capable of in the moment. We learned from various neurologists that we can say where in the brain processes that directly affect the body are being active. We also saw that the responses in our body to both our individual mental activity and what's going on around us happen far faster than nerve impulses or chemicals can travel through the body, which means they aren't all originating in the brain. So it turns out that some scientists have actually come to accept that what we call mind is not the product of the electrochemical activity of the brain, but is in fact the activity of a kind of field that surrounds and permeates the body. That means that the brain is actually a receiver-transmitter. It receives messages from the mind and transmits them to the body, and receives messages from the senses in the body and transmits them to the rest of the body and to the mind. We've also learned that the brain modifies what it receives from the senses and from the mind to fit past patterns of experience that are then stored as hardwired connections among the neurons, according to Begg's principle that neurons that fire together wire together, which means we see and hear and feel what we expect to or believe that we will. Other experiments we looked at demonstrated that what we call the individual mind continues to perceive and process for as much as several hours, even when the brain and heart are flatlined and the person is declared dead, which may be why most reports of that time do not fit the past patterns of experiences stored in the brain's neuronal connections, and why some people have a hard time remembering what the experience was until those new connections are made. Mind, then, is a field, a pattern of informed energy that exists during and after the body is functioning. Now, every field has a unique pattern of vibration that makes it different from the other fields around it. And some experiments have demonstrated that some people and some animals who have minds that are vibrating along the same patterns, that is, minds that resonate with each other, are able to sense when the other is focusing attention on them or about to come home. Experiments by Rupert Sheldrake and at the Institute of Noetic Sciences demonstrate that bodies change when someone a person is connected with turns attention their way. So, we're learning that mind affects matter. People began to see it in the double-slit experiments in quantum physics, where the subatomic building blocks of the universe, which can show up as energy or matter, do so depending on whether a mind is present to observe them. And it's also been demonstrated in the changing readouts from the random number generators on the network of computers run by the Global Consciousness Project. All of which helps us to understand how it is that our bodies and our environments shift and change as people change their thought processes. And it also helps us understand how mental and spiritual healing work and what's called the placebo effect. How the belief of a care provider in a treatment can help a patient receiving that treatment experience healing. All of this together means that a growing number of scientists are seeing that our individual mind is a field that is part of a larger field. Some people call it a global brain or noosphere. Or, to go back to the beginning of our work, in Carl Jung's terms, a collective consciousness. And more scientists are equating that larger field with what could be called the zero-point field or quantum field, out of which all matter and energy arise in that orderly system we call the universe, that Irvin Laszlo calls the Akashic field, using a Sanskrit term that refers to the fact that all mind, all memory, all possibility is stored in the quantum or zero-point field. So now that we've put all of that together, last week we began to explore some of the more popular explorations of how the mind works, and we started with what's often been called the law of attraction, and more accurately might be called the law of mirroring. You can catch up on all our past shows on the KXCR.net archives. Click on the little cloud up on the banner at the top of the screen, and on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where you'll also find the links to the clips, books, and authors that I mention for most of the shows that we've done. There was a gap, and I apologize for that. We're in the process of recreating those missing pieces. All right, so for the last couple of shows, in addition to experimental work, I've mentioned information provided by people who are doing something that is often called channeling. Esther Hicks is one of those. She channels what she calls Abraham, which calls itself source energy. And in seminars and many other recorded sessions, that source energy, Abraham, tells people that the way to achieve whatever it is they're asking for is to raise their energy to a vibration pattern that is closer to source by choosing to feel really good, to change their state of consciousness from their normal waking thinking thought structure. Remember that normal structure we talked about weeks ago? To change out of that and into something that is much more like their mind field, fluid, relaxed, flowing. There are hundreds of videos on YouTube with Esther sharing the information that flows through her in response to people's questions. Edgar Cayce is another person who, over a 50-year period in the late 19th and early 20th century, went into a deep trance a couple times a day, and he answered questions that there was no way he could have the information for. Several thousand of which sessions, 14,000 in the last document I saw, were recorded by shorthand and are in the library of the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach. Both of these people are what are called trance channelers because they go into a state of consciousness in which they're really not aware of what words are coming out of their mouth. Other folks, like the people on TV, the Long Island medium and other mediums, use a different method. They're fully awake and simply share what information they take in from some different source when asked. Recently, under the leadership of a naturopathic physician named Helene Wabe, who has a long history of clinical research, the Institute of Noetic Sciences has been exploring what these people are actually doing. They're using a variety of experimental techniques, and they're beginning to establish what channeling actually is, how it works, and how it affects people's brains. I'll let her tell you about it.
Of course, some research has already been done, but many of the studies have been small or used questionable scientific methods. Only recently has there been more rigorous research, but there's a need for a lot more. So what is channeling exactly? I'd like to use this umbrella definition. Channeling is the communication of information to or through a live human from a source other than the physical as we know it. This umbrella term contains words like medium, channel, and psychic. So what are the important research questions that need to be asked about channeling? We've chosen 6 that define our long-term comprehensive research program. So first, what do we already know from the published literature? What do we already know from unpublished resources? How common is channeling and what are its characteristics? How does channeling work? Can we verify the information? And what makes a channel a channel? So first, what do we already know?
That was at the beginning of this project where she was outlining what it is that they will be doing at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and that was in 2016. Now she has some results to share.
A good way to be able to share about this is to talk about one of the studies we did. We did a survey, it was almost 900 people, and they were split into 3 groups. One was scientists and engineers, the other was people from the general population, and the other was people on the IONS listserv. So we called them enthusiasts because they're completely into this stuff. So we surveyed, we asked these people about 27 different channeling experiences and said, hey, have you ever had this? And if so,
can you
how
describe
often?
some of them? Can you list some of those experiences that you asked about?
Sure. So one of the main questions that's actually been asked globally is about contact with the dead. Another was mind-to-mind communication, as people call that telepathy. Another was about being able to see at a distance. So some people might call that clairvoyance or remote viewing. And then more, common experiences like just knowing information that you wouldn't normally know. That's sometimes called claircognizance. And then clairempathy, which is like feeling other people's emotions. And this is a little different than, normal empathy in that, you see someone crying and you obviously know they're feeling sadness and you might feel some sadness for their sadness. But this is a little different in that you're actually feeling people's emotions without that traditional 5 senses feedback, if you will. So those are some of the items that we asked them about. We didn't say anything about this is a survey on channeling or psi or anything like that. We tried to keep it as neutral languaged as possible. And what was amazing is that we found over 90% of the people in those 3 groups had endorsed at least one of those items. And that number just completely blew me away. So I said, there's got to be something wrong here. So I looked at our items again, and we did another analysis where we took out think it was 4 or 5 items, like the clear empathy one, or that might be, maybe they just misread it and thought it was normal empathy or something like that. And it was still above 80%. And the scientists and engineers were very close to the other two groups. That also surprised us because of such strong taboos in research and the world in general, that we thought that they wouldn't have had those experiences. But according to that survey, they have, and they're not talking about it or studying it. And also to mention, there have been so many studies by different researchers all around the world looking at these various phenomenon, and we call it the prevalence. The percent of people who endorse it range from like 10% all the way up to, the 90s, like we shared in Japan and Iceland and Europe, huge studies with tens of thousands of people. So I think I say in the book, if you're, in a group of 10 people, imagine 8 to 9 of them have had some sort of experience like this at least one time. So the strongest predictor that we have control over, if you will, is meditation. And, this is very interesting to me, just being a meditation researcher, but being able to quiet the mind and get into that still state allows people to perform better on these type of tasks in the library. When people are surveyed in terms of having channeling experiences, meditators have them more. And also meditators, when they get into their practice, we did another study where we surveyed them and asked, have you had any of these experiences? Also develop having these channeling experiences more. And it's interesting, depending on the tradition, some spiritual teachers actually tell their students to ignore it, that it's a distraction from their spiritual path, and to not go there, because that could be driven by the ego to, oh, I can read minds, or oh, I can do this. And yet in these ancient traditions, it's a known outcome that when you begin, a very deep spiritual meditative practice, that you will start having these experiences.
So, yes, channeling and other forms of what are called psychic phenomenon is real, and it's not something weird that only a very, very few people experience, at least according to the surveys done by the Institute of Noetic Sciences under Helene Wabe's leadership. Hundreds of cases studied by the British Society for Psychical Research over the last 150 years, and now in dozens of labs around the world, have established that it is indeed possible for a person to receive information from an unseen source, information that is accurate and typically helpful to the individuals who request it. And yes, it is possible for most people to learn how. The ability to rest in a pleasant, relaxed state without focusing on anything in particular is all it takes. That's what they were referring to as meditation. So, as Esther Hicks says, she relaxes and takes a few long, slow, deep breaths and lets her mind focus on the sound of the air conditioner or the heater. And that then allows her thought, her normal thought structure, to slow down and allows the field of the mind to begin to express itself through her neuronal system in the brain. Now, if you want more, there are dozens of books out there that have been written by and about ordinary people who became curious and began to explore the possibility of accessing information from the Akashic field and other non-perceivable sources. Most of those books have been, in the past, about getting access to people who've passed over to the other side. They began with books like Stuart Edward White's The Betty Book from the 1930s and his 1960s book, The Unobstructed Universe, which is how Stuart was able to reach his wife Betty after she had passed over. For many of us, the movie Ghost with Patrick Swayze, Demi Moore, and Whoopi Goldberg has become the classic illustration of what that experience of reaching out to someone on the other side and letting them express themselves through the medium is like. Now, Esther Hicks and Edgar Cayce are doing something very different. They're opening to what we call the Akashic field, allowing some part of their awareness to express the information that is available there. Both of them do so by entering a trance state of consciousness, and typically they're not aware of what's being said through them. They learn about it later. Jane Roberts, who channeled an energy she called Seth, was also a trance channeler. And the energies that spoke through both Esther Hicks and Jane Roberts have narrated whole books to answer the kinds of questions that people have been asking them. What's remarkable to me is the similarity between and the consistency of not only these people's experiences, but their messages. Except where very specific questions about very specific situations require unique answers, they all invite us to relax and experience this life more fully, to enjoy more, and allow ourselves to be fully, authentically who we are. So in terms of what we've been saying in this series of programs, they all invite us to align our heart and brain and mind so that the body and the emotions are in alignment with the universal processes unfolding around us and in us. And all of us, they all say, can change what we are experiencing by changing our habits of thought and feeling, which is what the experimental evidence that we've talked about on this program suggests. These guys, the channelers, these sources of information from the Akashic field, tell us that all of us can be far more powerful beings than we've allowed. So our health issues, emotional issues, relationship issues, and even financial issues are all, these people say, the result of our past thoughts and feelings. And we can change these issues by changing our habits of thought and feeling. If you just tuned in, you are listening to Noetic Moments on KXCR 90.7 on the FM dial and streaming on KXCR.net. And that sound tells me we need to look at what's going on in the world today, but I'm going to take a look at this book that was referred to in our last interview with Dr. Wabe. The book is called The Science of Channeling. Surprise, surprise. And her contents are her personal story, and then a definition of channeling, and then the second chapter is what, after what is channeling is this a gift or a mental health issue? And she explains the differences there. She goes into how common are these experiences, as she described in this interview with the surveys. Is channeled material true? And having been part of the literature search that she talked about in that interview, I can tell you that some of it is clearly true and some of it is not so true. And there are ways to know. And perhaps we can talk about that in another show. Chapter 5 is how does channeling work? What's going on? And we've talked a little bit about that today. What do channelers have in common? Where is the information coming from? And then, Chapter 8, find your unique noetic signature. Chapter 9, use your intention to direct the content. And Chapter 10, how to channel daily for personal and collective good. And then she provides a glossary of channeling terms, a bunch of acknowledgments and references. The foreword gives us a lot of good information, and I'll give you a little piece of it here. Research suggests that all humans have channeling capabilities and that persistent and regular application of proven techniques can help anyone develop these normally latent skills. And then it says that this book serves as an excellent guide. And this is actually in the foreword written by Eben Alexander, the guy who wrote Proof of Heaven after his 90 minutes in a near-death experience. So he says, just as medical science has come to realize the power of the placebo effect as a robust, real-world example of the potential for mind-over-matter influence in our health, the scientific community at large is beginning to realize the primacy of consciousness's influence in our lives and reality. Fasten your seatbelts, he says, and prepare for an exciting, informative journey into the greater aspects of human potential. That's The Science of Channeling by Helane, Helane with an accent, and her last name is Wahbeh, Wahbeh. It's published by Reveal Press, an imprint of New Harbinger, and it came out in 2021. So if you're at all interested in developing your own capabilities or just trying to figure out what this whole thing is about, this book is a very, very useful resource, and it was an honor to be able to contribute to it in the ways that I was able to do so. All right. Well, I hate to say it, but that has to be it for today's show. The next time we get together, we'll look at more of the research being done in an attempt to understand what consciousness is, what it really does, and how we can experience life differently when we use our consciousness fully. We are out of time for today, but remember, you can continue the exploration on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where there is a list of our archive shows, and we try to have all the links for the books and the people and the interviews that we have bits of on this show. For now, thanks for joining me here on Noetic Moments at KXCR Community Radio, in the studios here in Florence, Oregon, at 90.7 FM. And this week, at the turning of the year, I hope you are really, really, really feeling the power of the possibilities that are emerging in us and around us.
You've been listening to Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments. This program is produced in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, supported by you, our listeners. Our theme music is Tumbling Planets, composed and performed by Jeff Lovejoy. To hear this program again or learn more about Noetic Sciences, search our website, www.noeticmoments.org.